My wife's lover had absolutely no idea I possessed the financial capital to purchase the entire company he proudly called his own. He always saw me as a quiet, unassuming man, someone he could physically intimidate and publicly humiliate without a single consequence. One evening, completely intoxicated by his own arrogance, he cornered me in a crowded restaurant, threatening physical violence and mocking what he believed was my pathetic, low-class existence. He thought his flashy title and gym-built physique gave him absolute dominance. He did not realize that true power doesn't throw punches. True power buys the battlefield. 5 days later, the absolute foundation of his entire universe began to violently collapse. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that reckless arrogance and betrayal always come with a heavy, unavoidable price. The heavy rain hammered against the glass windows of the upscale downtown lounge. I sat alone in a dimly lit corner booth, a half-empty glass of sparkling water resting on the polished oak table in front of me. I was wearing a simple, unbranded charcoal sweater and a pair of dark slacks. I am a man who learned decades ago that true wealth is a quiet shield, while ostentation is a loud, dangerous target. My name is Marcus, and for the past 20 years, I have built a private equity firm that silently controls a massive segment of the commercial real estate and tech manufacturing sectors. I was at the lounge because my wife of 7 years, Vanessa, had asked me to meet her there to discuss our separation. For months, the distance between us had widened into an unbridgeable chasm. I had sensed the coldness, the hidden text messages, the sudden unexplained weekend trips. I had already accepted the profound failure of our marriage. What I did not expect was that she would not arrive alone. The heavy brass doors of the lounge swung open, letting in a gust of damp, freezing wind. Vanessa stepped inside, wearing a designer trench coat I had purchased for her the previous winter. Right behind her was Julian. Julian was everything a hollow man strives to be. He was 10 years younger than me, built like a professional athlete, and dressed in a tailored silver suit that screamed of desperate ambition. He was a senior vice president of operations at Vanguard Logistics, a mid-sized supply chain corporation. He wore a massive gold watch that caught the dim light of the lounge, and he carried himself with the heavy, aggressive swagger of a man who believed the entire world owed him absolute submission. They marched directly toward my table. Vanessa looked slightly uncomfortable, refusing to meet my eyes, but Julian was practically vibrating with unadulterated predatory excitement. He did not sit down. He stood towering over my booth, completely invading my personal space. He placed his large, manicured hands flat on the polished oak table and leaned in close. I could smell the overpowering scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the metallic tang of pure adrenaline. He looked down at my simple sweater and let out a short, mocking laugh. He told me that Vanessa was finally leaving my pathetic, boring life behind. He bragged, loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear, that she needed a real man, a man with power, influence, and physical strength. He declared that my quiet, unassuming nature was a profound embarrassment to her. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up to meet his aggressive posture. I remained perfectly still, watching him with the cold, detached patience of an apex predator observing a blind animal stumbling into a trap. I kept my breathing slow and even. I simply asked Vanessa if this was how she wanted to handle the dissolution of our marriage. Julian didn't let her answer. His face flushed a deep, angry crimson at my absolute lack of fear. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to assert his physical dominance in a public space to feed his fragile vanity. He stepped around the table, aggressively grabbing the collar of my sweater with his heavy hand. He yanked me upward, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and ragged. He threatened to drag me out into the pouring rain and beat me until I finally understood my proper place at the bottom of the social hierarchy. He told me he was a king at Vanguard Logistics, a master of his universe, and that I was absolutely nothing. The lounge went dead silent. The bartender stopped wiping the glass. A few patrons turned their heads in shock, but I did not flinch. I did not try to break his grip. I looked directly into his furious, dilated eyes. I told him, in a voice entirely devoid of fear or anger, that physical violence was the absolute last resort of a powerless man. I smoothly reached up, removed his hand from my collar with a firm, unbreakable grip, and sat back down. Julian sneered, muttering a final, vicious insult before grabbing Vanessa's arm and marching out of the lounge, believing he had won a supreme victory. He thought he had humiliated a weak, defeated old man. He had absolutely no idea that he had just signed his own professional death warrant. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a highly secure number. My lead corporate attorney, Victor, answered on the second ring. I did not offer a polite greeting. I spoke with the terrifying, absolute authority of a man going to war. I told Victor I needed a complete, ruthless financial audit of Vanguard Logistics. I wanted to know their debt ratio, their outstanding shares, and the identities of their largest institutional investors. The hunt had officially begun. For 48 hours, I sat in the sprawling, dimly lit boardroom of my private equity firm, surrounded by elite forensic accountants and acquisition specialists. We tore Vanguard Logistics apart on paper. The company was struggling, kept afloat by high-interest bridge loans and a terrified board of directors. Julian's operational department was hemorrhaging money due to his gross incompetence and arrogant mismanagement, which he covered up with flashy presentations and aggressive corporate bullying. I ordered Victor to initiate a hostile takeover. We didn't do it quietly. I deployed overwhelming, unassailable financial force. Within 3 days, my firm aggressively purchased the controlling majority of Vanguard's outstanding debt and bought out the terrified shareholders at a premium. The legal maneuvers were absolute and unbreakable. By Friday morning, I completely owned Vanguard Logistics. I owned the warehouses, I owned the trucks, and, most importantly, I owned the silver-suited parasite who had threatened me in the lounge. I did not schedule a standard corporate meeting. I ordered Victor to invoke an emergency, mandatory executive review for Monday morning. I demanded the attendance of the entire Vanguard senior leadership team, specifically naming the senior vice president of operations. Monday morning, the corporate atmosphere in the Vanguard building was thick with panic. The executives knew a massive buyout had occurred over the weekend, but the identity of the new majority owner was strictly classified. Julian, completely oblivious to his impending doom, walked into the glass-walled executive boardroom, acting as if he owned the entire building. He was wearing another custom-tailored suit, loud and aggressive. He sat at the head of the table, bragging to his nervous colleagues about his weekend, completely confident that the new ownership would recognize his brilliant leadership. I stood in the shadowed hallway just outside the glass doors, wearing a bespoke midnight blue suit crafted from the finest Italian wool. It was the armor of a corporate executioner. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped into the brilliantly lit room. The conversation in the boardroom instantly died. Julian turned around in his heavy leather chair, an irritated scowl forming on his face. When his eyes locked onto mine, the sheer, blinding panic that washed over his features was a magnificent, beautiful sight. His arrogant, practiced smile completely collapsed. The healthy flush of his skin evaporated in an instant, leaving him the color of dirty ash. His brain violently rejected the image in front of him. The quiet, pathetic man he had physically assaulted was now standing at the head of the boardroom, radiating absolute, uncompromising authority. Victor stepped into the room behind me, placing a massive stack of legal documents onto the polished mahogany table. Victor formally announced to the terrified executives that I was the new absolute majority shareholder and acting chief executive of Vanguard Logistics. Julian scrambled backward in his chair, stammering wildly. His voice cracked, sounding like a terrified child. He tried to speak, tried to assert his usual dominance, but the words completely failed him. He realized in that agonizing second that his career, his wealth, and his entire fabricated identity were resting entirely in the palm of my hand. I did not raise my voice. True power never needs to shout. I looked Julian dead in the eye and leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the polished table. I systematically read his disastrous operational metrics out loud to the entire board. I exposed his financial waste, his aggressive incompetence, and the hollow, fraudulent nature of his entire career. I stripped him of his title, his corporate access, and his dignity in front of the very people he desperately needed to impress. With a voice as cold and hard as steel, I pronounced the final, absolute sentence. I fired him. I told him he was nothing but a petty bully in a borrowed suit, and that he would never step foot in my building again. The corporate execution was complete. Julian wept. The untouchable master of the universe sobbed openly as the corporate security team, men he used to aggressively order around, grabbed him by his tailored shoulders and marched him out of the building. He was thrown out onto the freezing Chicago pavement, entirely stripped of his power, his wealth, and his fabricated dignity. The profound lesson woven throughout this ordeal is that true value can never be measured by physical intimidation or loud, arrogant displays. True power lies in quiet integrity, unwavering patience, and the strength to dismantle a bully without ever throwing a single punch. A castle built on arrogance and disrespect will always inevitably collapse when it meets genuine, silent authority. If you found yourself inspired by this story of justice and quiet strength, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below.